bloodthirsty mafia boss Putin killing Russian elite to cling to power as 39 oligarchs and officials mysteriously die. Vladimir Putin is presiding over a mafia state where murder is a tool used to defeat his enemies and to scare his uneasy allies into keeping in line. Experts believe the deaths of at least 39 high-profile figures, ranging from oligarchs to scientists and even generals, could show the shadowy and blood-stained hand of the Kremlin. Dozens of high-profile figures have died since Putin launched his bloody war in Ukraine over a year ago, with many in odd circumstances, such as sudden suicides and falls from windows. Sergei Grishin, the so-called Scarface oligarch who sold Meghan and Harry their California mansion, died this week from sepsis after criticizing Putin. And meanwhile, Russian scientist Andrei Butikov, who created the Sputnik V vaccine, was strangled with a belt in his apartment last week. Both men were two of the latest to join the staggering body count of high-profile deaths of people linked to Mad Vlad. John Sweet, a retired U.S. Army military intelligence officer, and Mark Toth, a national security analyst, described Putin as running modern-day FSB version of Murder Incorporated. Murder Inc. was an organized crime group that operated in the U.S. and is believed to have been responsible for more than 1,000 contact killings in the 1930s. Anyone seen as a potential threat seems to have an attraction to an open window, Sweet told The Sun Online. Putin's regime, of course, has never admitted to anything, and has always dealt with the deaths of their enemies with a wry smile. But the pile of bodies, however, has appeared to have grown at an alarming rate of the last 12 months. The Sun Online totaled up at least 39 deaths since January 2022. And while not all the deaths will involve the hand of Vlad, with some having more prosaic or tragic explanations, all eyes remain on the Kremlin. Professor Anthony Glees, an intelligence expert from the University of Buckingham, told The Sun Online that the murder of his enemies, and his allies, is just course of conduct for Putin. And he points to a key moment in the last year that could explain the uptick in mysterious deaths, with Putin raging in March 2022 about there being fifth columnists in Russia. Fifth columnists is a broad-brush term to refer to enemies within nations, with Mad Vlad going on to say there are scum and traitors that need to purified and killed within Russia. Is this raging, venomous speech delivered in the early days of the invasion tantamount to a confession that explains many of the mystery deaths since? Possibly, but it's impossible to know for sure. Putin comes from a background of cloak and dagger, having served in the Soviet Union's brutal secret service, the KGB. It is here where Putin learned his murderous thinking, and it is an institution which has in principle survived at the top of the Kremlin. When the Vlad first came to power, being handed the reins by Boris Yeltsin on eve of the millennium, it essentially placed the secret police back in charge of Russia, explained Professor Glees. There are two kinds of victim, as far as we can tell: those who were opposed to Putin's Ukraine policies, frequently involved in big Russian corporations, explained Professor Glees. And those who Putin believes have double-crossed him, oligarchs from the world of business who have taken the money but not done his bidding, whether kept cash not meant for them, or opposed him politically, or perhaps both. The big question for analysts is whether these killings are political murders of political opponents who might be plotting to get rid of Putin, or mafia killings designed to encourage those who have taken Putin's gold not to stray, to understand that they were given shed loads of money, which actually belongs not to Putin but the people of Russia, to do as Putin orders, not to spend on themselves. In my opinion, the two things are the same. Russia under Putin has become a state where political opponents can and will be killed, and Russia under Putin is a mafia state, a network of foul criminals who believe that if they don't hang together, they will ultimately hang separately. Death is always there to remind Putin's cronies of their duties. Many of the deaths are particularly strange, but then get ruled as suicide and quickly swept under by the Russian authorities. Colonel Vadim Boyko was shot 5 times in his office. Despite being left riddled with bullets, however, the military chief's death was deemed as self-inflicted. And then there is the mysterious case of Pavel Antov, who died alongside his friend Vladimir Budanov. The duo both died while Antov, a millionaire sausage tycoon and politician, was celebrating his birthday at a hotel in Odisha, India. Budanov, described as Antov's companion, was found dead in his hotel room. And then just days later the tycoon was found dead in a pool of blood, having apparently fallen from the hotel. His death came just days after he criticized Putin's war in Ukraine. And then in the space of just 1 month 3 businessmen, Vasily Melnikov, Vladislav Avayev, and Sergei Protosiny, died alongside their families in a trio of apparent murder-suicides. Toth told The Sun Online, "The Kremlin, absolutely, is the connective tissue behind Putin's modern-day FSB version of murder, Inc. when it comes to the propensity for Russia's elite falling out of windows, conveniently dying of heart attacks, or committing suicide. We can't know exactly how many, but most of these deaths are not people dying from natural causes or self-harm. Lightning can strike twice in the same place, but in Russia, it has struck upwards of 35 times. Why are we sure it is the FSB? Because while there is nothing quiet about the manner in which Russia's scientists, key bureaucrats, oligarchs, and generals are dying, once disposed of, their cases quickly go as cold as a Russian winter. In other words, each in their own way, is intended as very loud messaging directed at some level of Putin's mafia cartel. But the silence that follows these assassinations is indicative of just how expertly they are planned and executed." He went on, "The Kremlin wants the Russian public to know each of these men has died, but they don't want Putin fingered for it, at least openly. Putin wants and needs his death sentences to be served cold. He does not want his victims to see it coming. Rather, Putin uses the fear that it may come at any time as a means of suppressing dissent. Putin's game, therefore, is different from most mafia structures. He is, in effect, willing to murder his way down to get to the men he wants in charge. By making murder a one-way street that goes in the opposite direction of the Kremlin, Putin insulates himself." Professor Glees explained this power pyramid built on foundations of murder is what keeps Putin at the top, and why it means he is unlikely to be ousted anytime soon, even as he fails in Ukraine. He compared him in no uncertain times to Adolf Hitler in 1945, who remained securely in power until the Allies were marching on Berlin. Was Germany prior to Hitler's death stable? Sadly, yes, Professor Glees told The Sun Online. Putin knows this and will take heart from it. After all, Hitler was defeated by the military might of his enemies, not by the hand of his own people who remained loyal to the last. In other words, his mafiosi conduct, killing and threatening, may seem to him not a sign of instability but proof that he can do what he wants with Russia. It is this that makes him so dangerous. Toth and Sweet added, 20th century history tells us it is hard to get rid of dictators, and Putin is no exception. That makes gauging his position tricky. Hitler, after all, survived up until a month before the ended and likely could have survived longer had he shifted his HQ to his Bavarian redoubt. In my opinion, Putin's ability to survive is likely equal to his capacity to keep murdering down. They added, no one part of his mafia-like cartel is strong enough to get rid of him, and that's by design. Putin's war in Ukraine continues to grind forward, with the Russians making small gains in the country's east. Kiev continues to call for Western support to help them defeat Putin, who had so far lost more than 150,000 soldiers. Vlad foolishly believed his forces would be welcomed into Ukraine as liberators when he invaded last February. But instead the initial attack ended in a disaster which saw his forces devastated and thrown back to Russia. Moscow's war machine, however, continues grind forward as they unleashed a new barrage of missiles this week. All eyes are now on the city of Bakhmut, the backdrop of the bloodiest battle of the war. President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that if the city falls, the road will be open once again into Ukraine.